Hello, and welcome to lesson 5 of my IELTS webinar series. Today, in this lesson, as promised, we are going to actually write a report for the writing task 1 graph or question, if you will. So in this lesson, we are going to learn how to understand the table or the graph. We're going to write the introduction. We're going to plan your approach. We're going to go over the body paragraphs. We're going to make some observations, and then we will do the conclusion. So I just want to review some of the keys to success that we talked about last time, because these are very important. If you do these things, you're definitely going to improve your score. And you just want to see how to incorporate all of these things in the graph that we're actually going to discuss today. So once again, you want to use good grammar, of course, always. Grammar is always very helpful. You want to use clear phrasing, especially when you're making observations about a graph. You want to make sure that the observations that you're making are clear. So you might be in your head saying something really amazing, but if the examiner or whomever is reading your report can't understand it, it doesn't really matter. So you want to be very clear with what you're saying. So don't get too fancy with your wording. And by that, I mean, you definitely want to include nice vocabulary in your answer, but make sure you understand how to use it. Because if you use that vocabulary incorrectly, then your phrasing just won't be very clear. If you are looking for how to use some transition words correctly, I wrote a nice long article about transition words, and I went over not every single transition word that you can use, but many of them, the transition words, the sequence words. Those are words like moreover, however, then, next, finally, in conclusion, to surmise, those things. And I gave you examples on how to use them in a way that is grammatically correct. So if that is something that you struggle with, if you make grammar mistakes as you're trying to transition to this better vocabulary, take a look at that article. You can find it on my website, alisasenglish.com. You can take a look at that. It also went out in my last newsletter. So if you get my newsletter, then you can just take a look at last week's, and you can take a look at that article. And that will definitely help you not make so many grammatical errors with this better vocabulary, and also help you keep your phrasing clear so that the examiner understands exactly what it is that you're trying to say. The key vocabulary, that's something that you want to make sure you do as well. We did a whole lot of that in the last lesson, so you can go refer back to that if you need some suggestions there. You want to make sure you're making good observations. And that really means make sure you understand how to read the chart or the graph. We'll go over that. The way that you read one type of graph will work for almost any other type of graph. So ways to improve your score. Again, these are from last week. You want to make sure you identify the key features. So you want to make sure you're talking about things that matter. And those will be really obvious. We'll go over those. You want to make sure you discuss them in an overview. So you want to make sure that you're essentially telling the examiner what this graph or chart is about. When you're writing for task 1, assume that they don't have the graph. So you have to describe the graph to them. You have to tell them what it's about. And that's really what these two things are saying. When you're talking about identifying the key features and talking about them in an overview, that's your introduction. Make sure you tell them what the graph is about. Otherwise, they won't know what you're talking about. You want to use the data, which just means use the numbers. You can use all the nice vocabulary that you want and make the best observations. But if you don't write down any numbers, then you're not really describing the graph. It's so important to make sure that you give these numbers when you're talking about the graph or the chart that you're describing. And again, you want to make sure you're using good observations, and you want to make sure that you write at least 150 words. They don't care if you write more. I tend to write a lot. But I'm used to writing these types of things, so I can do it quickly. But you want to make sure you write at least 150 words. You want to practice this. You want to make sure you count those words so you can see what it takes for you to write 150 words. I can write 150 words in one body paragraph without it taking too much effort. But that's because I'm used to doing this. So the more comfortable you are with writing observations about graphs and charts, the easier it will be for you to get to 150 words, because it's really not a lot of words. But if this is something that is new for you, it might not be that easy, especially if you're not used to reading graphs or charts. But you want to make sure that you are getting to that 150 word mark, because they will take away from your score if you don't get to that place. Now, if you write 149 words, will they deduct from your score? Honestly, I don't know. Sometimes some people will say they won't if you're a few words short, but that's not a chance that I would be willing to take. So my advice is make sure you get to 150 words. Aim for 160 to 180. That way you're always safe. So when you practice and you count your words, try and make sure you get to at least 160. You want to have 4 paragraphs. So your introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and your conclusion. You can have 3 body paragraphs if you want to. You want to use linking words, and you want to use reference words. So linking words are the kinds of words that I was talking about before. Moreover, however, therefore, next, then. What you really want to make sure you do, this is part of being clear. You want to make sure you are clear. You're using words that make it easy for someone to read what you're writing. That's really all it is. It doesn't really matter which words you use to do it. You just want to make sure that you use some words that make it very clear as to what you're talking about so someone can follow along. Spelling counts. That's really, really important. How you spell counts. So make sure you're up on your spelling. And don't be informal. And that just means don't use slang, don't use idioms. That's all that really means. Use different sentence structure. Your sentences shouldn't all be super short. Use the correct tense. Most of these graphs will be in present tense. All right, so let's get started. So in the last lesson, I talked about this particular graph, so I thought it would make sense for me to actually write something for this graph. This is the graph that it's been on the exam a lot. So if you've taken the exam in the past 6 months, you've probably seen this graph. And it's the one where we're talking about percentage of students proficient in a foreign language, and it gives you 6 countries: China, Romania, Thailand, India, Russia, and Vietnam. So if you've taken the exam recently, you are probably familiar with this graph. If you're watching this video, you can see this graph. If you're just listening to this on the podcast, the only thing you do want to take a look at this graph just for a second so you understand everything that I say. Or if you're familiar with this graph, then you don't really have to. I will put a link to this graph in the podcast so that you're able to just take a look at the graph real quick so you know what I'm talking about. All right, so here is the graph. So let's talk about understanding this graph. So the way that you understand this graph and pretty much every other type of graph, even the map, the only time where this doesn't work perfectly is with the table. But what you want to do is you want to look outside of the graph. So here you have the actual information, like the countries, and it's a bar graph. So how far or how far up the the actual bars go in the graph. So you have that. That's your data. So I'm saying look around that. So start at the top, and you can either go clockwise, which is to the right, the direction that a clock goes in, or you can go counterclockwise, which is to the left, the opposite direction that a clock goes in. So clockwise is to the right, just like a clock. Counterclockwise is to the left, the opposite direction that a clock goes in. So you're going to look at all of the information around the graph. By the way, this is also one of the graphs that I use in my writing ebook. So it's a really popular graph. And the only difference between what we're going to go over today and the ebook is there's just a lot more detail in the ebook. But we're going to do a good overview here, and you should be able to pretty easily improve your score for this type of graph and hopefully any type of graph. So we're going to start at the top, and we're just going to look and see what's outside of the graph, what's outside of the numbers. So at the top, it says percentage of students proficient in a foreign language. That tells us what this graph is about. It is about the percentage of students proficient in a foreign language. The other really great thing that is at the top of this graph is the word percentage, because you always have to know how something is measured. And in this case, it's measured in percentage. And it tells us that right at the top. Usually that's somewhere on the side, but in this case, they tell us at the top. So I like to go counterclockwise to the left. I just feel like the information is in order most of the time when I go that way, especially with line graphs. So that's my habit. You can go the other way if you want to. You just want to go in a circle. That's all that matters, is that you go in a circle. So we started at the top. We're going counterclockwise. So we're going to the left. So we're at the sides, and we see the numbers 70 to 0. So those are the percentages, 0 to 70. That's what we're counting. So we're going to keep going in a circle. And now we're at the bottom. And it gives us all of the names of the countries: China, Romania, Thailand, India, Russia, Vietnam. It also gives us another piece of information at the bottom of this graph, and that's males and females. So males is blue, females is green. So by going in a circle around the outside of this graph, we've gotten all of this information. We're going to keep going in a circle, and we'll go to the other side. There's nothing there, so we'll keep going until we get to the top again. So we're just going around the outside of the graph, making a circle to make sure we get all of that great information, because that's the information we're going to put in our introduction. Those are those key features that we're talking about. They're all on the outside. It's the same thing with a line graph. With a map, it's the same concept as well. With a table, if you look at what's around the edges, you will find this information as well. So this is how you understand a graph. So the important things that we just went over that the graph told us is the percentage of students proficient in a foreign language. That was at the top. The percentage numbers 0 through 70, that was to the left. The countries, the 6 countries that this graph talks about, and the gender. So males and females, green for females, blue for males. So all of this goes in the introduction, and this is where you get all the information for the introduction. You don't really need anything else. And this tells the examiner what this graph is about. So I said earlier, you want to write this as if they don't have the graph. So you have to explain to them what this graph is about. And that's what you do in your introduction. And you get all of that information from going in a circle outside of the graph. So I want to make sure that you understand how to read this graph. And so we're just going to do a quick example of how to use the information on this graph. So like we already know, because we looked at the outside of the graph, we have 2 colors here, green and blue. Green represents females, blue represents males. So let's look at the first bar in the bar graph, or the first country. The first country is China. So it's males and females. So it's the first country is actually the first two bars. So we're looking at China. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my finger, or the mouse in this case, at the very bottom. So at 0, right at the bottom of males, of Chinese males. So I'm at 0. And I'm going to go all the way up until the bar stops. So all the way up until the bar stops, to the end of the blue. And then I'm going to take my finger, or the mouse in this case, and I'm going to go to the left towards the numbers. And my mouse, or my finger, ends up stopping somewhere in between 14 and 21. So we're somewhere in between the number 14 and 21. And we know those numbers are percentages because it tells us that at the top. So we're somewhere in between 14% and 21%. So we're going to have to estimate, we're going to have to guess what that number is. We talked about in the last lesson that when you don't have an exact number, you want to make sure you give clues that the number is not exact. So about, an estimated, approximately, just over, just under, those words. So we're going to say it's about 18% of males in China are proficient in a foreign language. So now let's do females. So that's the second bar. So again, I'm going to take my finger, or my mouse, and put it at the very bottom of the second bar, the bottom of the green bar over China. We're at 0. And we're just going to go up until the bar ends. Move the finger, your finger, or the mouse up until the bar ends, until there's no more green. And then we're going to go over towards the numbers to the left. And my finger, or my mouse, ends up being between 28 and 35. So we're between 28% and 35%. So we're going to estimate that at about 31%. So about 31% of Chinese females are proficient in a foreign language. And that's how we read the graph. Now with a line graph, it's the same thing. You just take your finger at the bottom of whatever the color is, and you just move it up until the line ends, and then you just go over to the numbers to see how much it is, the percentage, or whatever unit it's measured in. So that's how you read a graph. So now let's move on to the introduction. We're going to write our introduction. Like I already said, we already gathered all of the information that needs to go into our introduction because it's all on the outside of the graph. And like I said, that's the same with line graphs. This is obviously a bar graph. Tables, it's pretty much the same. With maps, it's the same for the most part. Pie charts, you'll have to get information from the outside, and then usually the label is on the actual pie. So the label you have to get from inside on the pie. But most of the information you'll get from outside of the graph. You just go in the circle outside of the graph. Okay, information that's really, really important that you want to make sure you do include in your introduction is the type of graph, how it's measured, so in this case, percentage, the unit, what it depicts or what it shows. So in this case, it shows the percentage or the amount of students who are proficient in a foreign language from the 6 countries. So my introduction, or a possible introduction for this, could be the following. This bar graph illustrates the percentage of students who are proficient in foreign languages in the following 6 countries: China, Romania, Thailand, India, Russia, and Vietnam. The graph breaks down each country's proficiency by gender, and it is measured by percentage. So that's 42 words. Your introduction is going to probably be anywhere between 25 to 40 words. So as long as your introduction's in between there, you should be good with your word count. And same thing with your conclusion. Your conclusion will also probably be somewhere between 25 and 40 words. And that means the remainder, the rest of the words, somewhere around 100, are going to go in between your two body paragraphs. So your body paragraphs will probably be somewhere between 50 and 60 words, at least. They can be longer. Longer is fine. You just don't want to take up too much time because remember, you only have about 20 minutes to write this. That's why you want to practice. So now that we have our introduction, let's talk about planning your approach. It doesn't really matter how you approach a graph. The only thing that matters is that it's clear and organized. So I'm going to go over a couple of different ways that you can approach talking about this graph. There are other ways. These are just some that I came up with. It doesn't matter which one of these ways you choose. It doesn't matter if you choose your own way. All that matters is that it's clear. So you can do 2 body paragraphs. You can do 3 body paragraphs. It's up to you. It just depends on how you want to break down the information. Each paragraph, it should be very clear what it's talking about. So one way that you could break this down is you could break it down by gender. So your first body paragraph could be all about males, and your second body paragraph could be all about females. Another way that you could do it is you could break it down with most versus least. So it's 6 countries total. So the 3 countries with the most proficient speakers could be in body paragraph 1, and the 3 countries with the least proficient speakers could be in body paragraph 2. Or you could have 3 body paragraphs. So do general and then by gender. So your first body paragraph could just be general observations. Your second body paragraph could just be males. Your third body paragraph could just be females. And you could also do your first body paragraph could be general. Your second body paragraph could be the top 3 countries, the 3 countries with the most proficient speakers. And your third body paragraph could be the bottom 3 countries, the 3 countries with the least proficient speakers. You could also do countries and gender. So body paragraph 1 would go over the countries. Body paragraph 2 would go over the gender. That's the one I'm going to do. So again, it doesn't matter how you do it. You can use one of these. You can use another one that you thought of on your own. It doesn't matter, but you want to have a plan. So take a minute, take 30 to 60 seconds and decide how you want to approach it. You'll get a much better answer if you do that. An easy way to approach anything is to start with something general, your first body paragraph being general, and your second body paragraph being more specific, depending on what the information is. That's something that you can always do no matter what they give you. All right, so let's talk about that first body paragraph. Body paragraph 1, or BP1 is what I like to call it for short. So in this body paragraph, I'm going to make overall observations about the countries using the data. So when I say using the data, I mean using the numbers. Remember, you got to use the numbers. So I'm going to go from most to least. So whenever you're doing observations and you're including many different countries or many different subjects or types, you want to make sure that you're organized in the way that you approach that. The easiest way is to go from highest to lowest. Or if you're doing dates, the easiest way is to go from earliest to latest. So from the beginning to the end. Again, that's keeping things clear. Also, it's just easier. I think you can write faster if you do it that way. I think the more you have a plan, the faster you'll write. And I think the more you'll write. I think when students don't write enough, it's because they didn't think about how they were going to approach it. They just panic and start writing without a plan. Don't do that. So the other thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about both males and females combined. So we have 6 countries, and then we have males and females. So I'm going to look at all of the students, the male students, the female students, all of the students combined. I'm not going to talk about just males or just females. I'm combining them. So you can put non-data observations at the beginning or the end of this paragraph. So last week when we talked about the things that you wanted to make sure you included to improve your score, we talked about observations. Now you have observations that include the data, that include the numbers, but then you have observations that you won't get just from reading the graph. You actually have to think about what it's telling you. And so those are things that don't involve the numbers, and we'll go over what some of those are. I personally like to put my non-data observations in the end. But if you are someone who struggles with time, you might want to put yours in the beginning. For me, it's just more logical to put them at the end because I've talked about the graph. I've told you all about the graph. I've explained it to you. And now I'm kind of telling you, what does all this information mean? That's what your non-data observations do. They tell you what this all means. So what does it mean that this many Chinese students are proficient in a foreign language? What does that mean? So you can put that at the beginning if you want to. If you're going to run out of time, put it at the beginning. If you are comfortable getting it all done in 20 minutes, you can put it wherever it makes sense for you. For me, it just makes more sense to put it at the end. I'm just pointing this out to let you know that you can put those things here. If what I just said confuses you, ignore it, because we'll go over this in detail when I actually put it in my essay. So back to what I'm going to be talking about in body paragraph 1. Like I said, I'm going to make overall observations about the countries using the data, using the numbers, and I'm going to talk about the men and the women together, combined. When you combine male and female students in order from greatest to least, it goes like this: India, Romania, Vietnam, Russia, Thailand, and China. India, Romania, Vietnam, Russia, Thailand, China. If you decide that you want to go from most to least, it would be a really great idea to write down the most from the least. That's why I did this. So if I were writing this on the exam and I knew, okay, I'm going to go from countries, I'm going to go over the countries in order of most to least, I'm going to write it down. The more you plan, the faster it will go, promise. So this is what my body paragraph 1 looks like. It's long. So India has the highest overall level of both male and female students proficient in a foreign language, with approximately 67% of female students and 56% of male students speaking a foreign language proficiently. Romania was a close second with just over 63% of females and 42% of male students speaking a foreign language proficiently. While not nearly having the same level of proficiency as the previous 2 countries, students in Vietnam are the third most proficient, with 56% of females and an estimated 39% of males obtaining this skill. Leading the bottom 3 is Russia, with slightly over 42% of females and 35% of males being able to speak proficiently. Thailand has the second fewest students proficient in a foreign language, with just under 28% and about 32% of female and male students, respectively. Bringing up the rear is China, with approximately 32% of females and 18% of males able to speak a foreign language proficiently. Like I said, it's long. It's 168 words. which is all the words you need for your entire essay. You do not need to make yours this long, obviously. So what I did is I went over every single country, both males and females, which is why it was so long. So first, I want to tell you how you can make yours shorter. My rule of thumb is this. You do not have to talk about all of the data. So remember that you don't have to talk about everything. If you do, your body paragraphs will be really long like mine. Now, if you can write long body paragraphs and talk about everything in 20 minutes, by all means do it. But most people can't. So in that case, what I like to do is make sure you talk about the most and make sure you talk about the least. So in this case, we have 6 countries. The most is India. The least is China. Make sure you talk about India and China. Now, if you want to get rid of some countries, if you want to edit some countries out, I would edit out or I would not talk about the middle 2 countries. So that would be Vietnam and Russia. I would not talk about them. And then I would edit out 1/3 of what I said, because I'm taking away 2 of the 6 countries. So I'd only talk about 4 countries. I'd talk about India, Romania, Thailand, and China. All right, so I want to talk about some of the words that I used in this body paragraph. So I started out saying India has the highest overall level. So that's a great indicator. It's a great way to explain to someone how you're going to discuss this. So I'm telling you, India has the highest overall level. That's very clear for the examiner, for your reader, so they know exactly what you're talking about. India has the most. And I say with approximately 67% of female students. And remember, last week we talked about if you don't have an exact number, you've got to make sure you tell the reader or the examiner that you're not giving the exact number. It's a guess. So approximately, an estimated, just over, just about. Those are those words you can use to tell people that. So when I get to Romania, I say it was a close second. So when you're talking about sequence words, a close second. So instead of just saying second was Romania, I say a close second. It's just a better way to phrase it. With just over 63%. So again, just over is another way of letting the examiner or the reader know I don't have an exact number. And then I say, well, not nearly having the same levels of proficiency. So I let you know, I let the examiner or the reader know that Romania was a close second, but Vietnam isn't so close. So you could have said Vietnam was a distant third. So there's space in between those levels. And then leading the bottom 3 is Russia. So leading the bottom 3, or I could have said India leads the pack. So that's another way of saying it's the most. And then Thailand is just very simple. Thailand has the second fewest. And then I say bringing up the rear is China. So bringing up the rear is a great way to say that something is last. I like to use bringing up the rear. I use it a lot. By the way, I like to write these really long body paragraphs for students because I notice that students will actually write about half of the example that I give them. So mine is 168 words. If you write half of that, you're in good shape. So I noticed that. It also gives you a lot of examples of what you can do and how you can word and phrase things. And it seems that helps. So that's another reason why I keep them long. All right, so now let's move on to body paragraph 2. In body paragraph 2, I'm going to talk about gender. Notice how before I show you what I wrote in my body paragraphs, I tell you what I'm going to talk about. I tell you what I'm going to include. That's part of planning. It doesn't take very long to figure this out. In the 20 minutes, you're probably going to spend a total of 3 minutes planning. But it helps you a lot. It helps you not panic. It helps you include everything you want to include. And I just think it makes you write faster. So anyway, I'm going to talk about gender. I'm going to give some general observations. Now, I could go country by country. I could talk about gender country by country, but I just did that. So I'm going to make general observations. General observations are the non-data observations, so without the numbers. I am going to use some numbers here because you want to make sure that you use numbers in both your first body paragraph and your second body paragraph. But I'm also going to make some general observations. And so this is when we can talk about those non-data observations that I was talking about before. This is where I put some of mine. Like I said, if you want to put yours earlier, you can. This just makes sense to me. And so you want to do what makes the most sense to you. So for body paragraph 2, I said I'm going to talk about gender. I said I'm going to make some general observations. Whenever you make general non-data observations, you have to ask yourself some questions. And so some questions that I'm going to ask myself are, which countries have more proficient female students than males? Which countries have the largest gap between female and male learners? So in some countries, there's a lot more females that are proficient than there are males. So which countries are those? And like I said, these are the non-data observations. So non-data observations are the observations that don't talk about the numbers. I'm going to show you my body paragraph 2, and then we're going to go over those non-data observations in detail. So body paragraph 2. By far, more female students have achieved proficiency in a foreign language than their male counterparts. In all but one country, more females than males are proficient in a foreign language. Thailand is the only country where this phenomenon does not happen. The largest gap between female learners and male learners occurs in Romania, with nearly 25% more female students being proficient. The next largest gender gap occurs in Vietnam, with almost 17% more females being proficient than males. China, too, boasts a large gap, with nearly 14% of women having proficient foreign language levels. Russia has a much smaller gap, with males only lagging their female counterparts by approximately 7%. So that's my second body paragraph, and it's 115 words. So if you were to take things out of this body paragraph, you would take out the data observations, take out some of the number observations, not all of them, but you would take out some of them. You would not take out the non-data observations. And in a minute, I'll show you which ones those are, but you keep those. So again, like I said last time, you want to make sure you talk about the most, and you want to make sure you talk about the least. And if you want to take something out, take out the middle. Now, you should be practicing writing these essays. So you should have an idea of what you need to take out and how much you need to take out or not include. So the most is Romania. I say the largest gap occurs in Romania, and the least is Russia. So I would include those. Vietnam, China, I don't have to include if I don't want to, or if I don't have time. So I want to just go over some of the things that I said here. At the beginning, these are all my non-data observations. We're going to talk about those in a second, so I'm going to skip through those. So I'm going to start talking about the largest gap. So gap is a great word if you're talking about space between or distance, or there being a lot more of one than there is another. So when you're comparing, gap is a great word to compare. So the largest gap between female learners and male learners occurs in Romania. And again, I say with nearly 25%. I don't have an exact number. And I say the next largest gap occurs in Vietnam. And then China too boasts a large gap with almost 17%. So I say almost. So just about almost. And then Russia has a much smaller gap with males only lagging. So lagging means you're falling behind. So when you lag, you're behind. So I just wanted to give you guys some of those highlights there. So now let's talk about the observations, these non-data observations. So remember, when I use the word data, I mean numbers. So these observations that don't include numbers, these are more general. So I say by far more female students have achieved proficiency in foreign language than their male counterparts. And if you look at this graph, it's very clear that there are more females that are proficient in a foreign language than there are in males. I mean, this happens in almost every single country. In all but one country. That's another observation to say this happens in 5 out of the 6 countries. So in all but one country, more females than males are proficient in a foreign language. Thailand, so you want to say which country it is. So Thailand is the only country where this phenomenon does not happen. So our first non-data observation is, wow, more females than males know a foreign language. Second observation is, in 5 out of the 6 countries, more females than males are proficient. More females than males know a foreign language in 5 of the 6 countries. It's a lot. And then the largest gap between female and male learners occurs in Russia. So this largest gap, the country where you have the biggest difference between female and male students, is in Romania. So you see there are no numbers here because I'm making these overall observations. I'm not just reading the graph or the chart and telling you what it says. So when you make the data observations, you're reading the chart or the graph, and I'm just telling you what it says. But then to make non-data observations, you want to get a 7. This is what you need to do. You need to make those non-data observations. You got to tell me, you got to go beyond the numbers. Give me more than just the numbers. And that's what these are. So now let's get to the conclusion. So in the conclusion, you want to repeat the most important things that you've said. And really what you want to do is you want to pick the winners and the losers. And by winners and losers, I mean who was the most, who was the least. In some cases, in a line graph, it might be who moved the most and who moved the least. For example, India has the most proficient learners in every category. So males and females in India are more proficient than anybody else. China has the least. By the way, that's a non-data observation. I'm giving you information and I'm interpreting. I'm understanding the numbers and telling you what they mean. So if you have not stated any non-data observations, if you have not already made non-data observations, make sure you put at least 1 in the conclusion. And if you have any extra non-data observations that you'd like to talk about, obviously it's the conclusion, so it's your last chance to do it. So get them in there. I'm going to put 1 in there. And so here's my conclusion. In conclusion, female students' success in becoming proficient in a foreign language far outweighs their male counterparts in almost every country. That's a non-data observation. While many countries enjoy large numbers of proficient students, India is the only country that has both male and female students at a proficiency level over 50%. Every other country fails to meet this standard. So my non-data observation, my big one here, is that India is the only country where more than half of their students, whether it's male or female, over half of their students are proficient. All right, so here's the whole essay. I did take out a little bit. This bar graph illustrates the percentage of students who are proficient in a foreign language in the following 6 countries: China, Romania, Thailand, India, Russia, and Vietnam. The graph breaks down each country's proficiency by gender, and it's measured by percentage. India, Romania, and Vietnam led all countries, with India having the highest overall level of both male and female students proficient in a foreign language, with approximately 67% of female students and 56% of male students reaching proficiency. Vietnam rounded out the top 3 countries, with 56% of females and an estimated 39% of males obtaining this skill. Russia, Thailand, and China were in the bottom half. Leading the bottom 3 is Russia, with slightly over 42% of females and 35% of males being able to speak proficiently. Bringing up the rear is China, with approximately 32% of females and 18% of males able to speak a foreign language proficiently. In all but one country, more females than males are proficient in a foreign language. Thailand is the only country where this phenomenon does not happen. The largest gap between female learners and male learners occurs in Romania, with nearly 25% more female students being proficient. Vietnam and China also boast a large gap at 17 and 14% respectively. Russia has a much smaller gap, with males only lagging their female counterparts by approximately 7%. In conclusion, female students' success in becoming proficient in a foreign language far outweighs their male counterparts in almost every country. While many countries enjoy large numbers of proficient students, India is the only country that has both male and female students at a proficiency level over 50%. Every other country fails to meet this standard. There you go. That is the whole essay. You'll notice there were a few changes, and that's because I took some things out and shortened it a little bit. Just a little. All right, so that is it with this. I always let you guys know that if you want some more help with your IELTS preparation, I have a couple of things that can help you. You can get IELTS speaking feedback. So this is feedback for the speaking section of the exam. You can actually submit your answers to questions to me, and I will give you feedback on 10 part 1 questions, on 1 part 2 question, and on 4 part 3 questions. And I will judge you on the language that you use, how well you answer the question, your pronunciation, your grammar, your vocabulary, your pronunciation, and your annotation, your confidence level, and your fluency. And I'll give you some suggestions on correcting your grammar, vocabulary, phrasing, idioms, all that good stuff. And if you really want to get into it, you can get my speaking ebook, which goes over answers for predicted questions, idioms, vocab, phrasal verbs, ways to describe people and places, suggestions for starting your own sentence, and homework that covers any additional questions that you might be asked. Not every single question that you could be asked, but you will cover enough that you will be prepared. You can also get my writing ebook, and it goes over academic task 1, similar to how we did today, but just with some more detail. And it goes over all the different types of graphs, the bar graphs, line graphs, pie charts, tables, maps. With task 2, it goes over the types of questions you could get and the structure that you should use for each question, how to write your introduction, your conclusion, your body paragraphs, grammar, key words and phrases. So I actually give you some phrases that you could and should use in the actual exam that go over the phrases for common topics. All right, so if you want to get the speaking feedback, it's $19. If you want to get the ebook, it's $29.99. Each ebook is $29.99. You can get them both for a little bit of a discount at $49.99. And you can just go to my website, Alisa's English, to get all of that and to also get other juicy bits of information on how to improve your score. Well, thank you very much for spending this bit of time with me. Hopefully this will help all of you achieve a higher score on the exam. See you next time.